Good afternoon. Welcome to The Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to India-Malaysia relations and the Act East policy, as Prime Minister Modi is visiting Malaysia and the two countries will have greater economic and strategic ties. The second article is related to India-US trade deal and its impact on the critical sectors, as the two countries have worked out a framework for an interim agreement on trade. Additionally, we'll be discussing 5 articles in the prelims pointers section which will be helpful for your prelims preparation. The first article is related to India-Malaysia relations and the Act East policy, as Prime Minister Modi is visiting Malaysia and the two countries are expected to deepen their cooperation. And deeper ties with Malaysia will be significant for the furtherance of India's Act East policy. Therefore, we'll discuss the significance of Malaysia for India, the challenges in the bilateral ties, the achievements of the Act East policy, the challenges in implementing the Act East policy, and a few suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. First, let's start with India-Malaysia relations. Malaysia is a Southeast Asian country which is separated by the South China Sea into two parts, the Western Malaysia, the peninsular Malaysia which shares its borders with Thailand, and the Eastern Malaysia which is on the Borneo Island. The Malaysia shares the land borders with Thailand, Indonesia and Brunei. The highest peak in Malaysia is Mount Kinabalu. Now let us first discuss the significance of Malaysia for India. There has been historical ties between the two countries. The two countries established diplomatic relations in 1957. The ties date back even before the formal political relations. For example, they have been linked through the Bay of Bengal and the Strait of Malacca for the purposes of trade and cultural ties. Both were former British colonies within the Commonwealth. And subsequently in 1960s, the ties became even more stronger because of the cordial relations between Jawaharlal Nehru and Abdul Rahman, the Malaysian premier. And even Malaysia gave moral as well as financial support to India during the 1962 India-China crisis. And in reciprocation, India also supported the formation of Malaysia. India supported their counter-communist strategies in 1960s to 1980s. Therefore, the ties between the two countries have been upgraded in 2015. The bilateral relations were upgraded to an enhanced strategic partnership. In 2024, it was further upgraded to a comprehensive strategic partnership. There is also a significant people-to-people goodwill as well for the Indians in Malaysia. Additionally, Malaysia is significant for us for economic cooperation as well, because Malaysia is India's 16th largest trading partner. And within ASEAN, Malaysia is the third largest trading partner of India. We export mineral oils, mineral fuels to Malaysia. We export aluminium, iron, steel, copper, organic chemicals, electrical machinery, even nuclear machinery and equipments to Malaysia. We also have significant imports from them. For example, we import palm oil from Malaysia, mineral fuels and oils, copper, wood, etc. Even the trade settlement in the Indian rupees have been explored between the two countries. There is significant FDI, foreign direct investment, which comes into India from Malaysia to the tune of $3 billion. The trade between the two countries has also been significant, although there has been a negative trade balance between India and Malaysia in the favor of Malaysia, as Indian exports to Malaysia are less than India's imports from Malaysia. And there are Malaysian companies which have invested in India, for example, Petronas, Geriatric, and Indian companies have also invested there. For example, Ranbaxy Malaysia, Biocon Malaysia, there are joint ventures as well, and Indian investments of the IT giants, for example, investments of Infosys, TCS, etc. in Malaysia. Additionally, there are India-Malaysia CEOs Forum, which also promotes the economic cooperation among the business ventures between the two countries. And there are defense and strategic cooperation also between the two countries. For example, in 1993, an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, was signed for the strategic cooperation between the two countries. It was amended further in 2023, and India regularly participates in Lima, that is Langkawi International Maritime and Aerospace Exhibition. Also, there are joint working groups established between the two countries, the groups on counter-terrorism and transnational crime, also the groups on science and technology, as well as information technology and multiple other areas. Additionally, there is significant cultural cooperation between India and Malaysia. For example, the establishment of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Indian Cultural Center in Kuala Lumpur. There are celebrations of International Yoga Day in Malaysia also, which projects India's cultural power, soft power in Malaysia as well. There are events commemorating Rabindranath Tagore, World Sanskrit Day, Hindi Divas, Gandhi Jayanti, Ambedkar Jayanti, which are celebrated in Malaysia as well. Also, there is a large Indian diaspora which resides in Malaysia. The earlier diaspora comprised of the people who were taken there by the British. The British took the Indians to work in the plantations in Malaysia, the indentured labor which migrated to work in the plantations in Malaysia. There were some semi-professionals also who migrated. Now there is a large community of about 2.75 million persons of Indian origin. This is the second largest PIO community in the world, the largest PIO community being in the USA. This is so large that it accounts for almost 7% of Malaysia's population, and 90% of them are from the Tamil origin because of the migrations at the times of the British, and therefore 90% of them speak Tamil language. But there are certain issues that the Indian diaspora faces in Malaysia, certain concerns, for example, illegal immigration, workplace exploitation, exploitation of the Indian seafarers. There is human trafficking, worker repatriation related challenges as well. There are other areas of cooperation between India and Malaysia, for example, tourism. India is the fifth largest source of tourists for Malaysia, which helps the Malaysian economy. There is cooperation in the area of traditional medicine. In 2010, an MOU was signed between the two countries for the uses of traditional medicine, promotion of traditional medicine in Malaysia as well. Also, there is cooperation on higher education. Another MOU was signed in 2010 for cooperation in higher education between the two countries. India provides various scholarships, for example, Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation scholarships, the ICCR, Indian Council for Cultural Relations scholarships, and Ayush scholarships as well for the Malaysian students studying in India. Also, there are several agreements between the two countries. For example, the MOU on Defense Cooperation signed in 1993 and then amended in 2023. There is the Agreement on Cooperation in Science and Technology, MOU on Cooperation in Tourism, the SECA Comprehensive Economic and Cooperation Agreement, the MOU on Mutual Recognition of Educational Degrees and Certificates, the MOU on Cyber Security, the MOU for Cooperation in Broadcasting also. But there are certain challenges in the ties between the two countries. For example, there are economic challenges. Like China is the largest export destination for Malaysia. India is the 8th largest export destination for Malaysia. Naturally, they prioritize China in their trade relations. The trade volume between the two countries has also been low, not only with Malaysia but with all the other ASEAN countries also, because of the concerns of the policy mismatches. And also there has been a persistent trade deficit with Malaysia as well. Then there are political challenges also. For example, the political ties between the two countries deteriorated, especially during the second term of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, the Malaysian premier, because he made adverse remarks regarding the Kashmir and also the Citizenship Amendment Act of India. Regarding Kashmir, when India abrogated Article 370, Dr. Mohammad Mahathir, he called it an invasion by India. Even the Citizenship Amendment Act, he called it as an anti-Muslim stance by India. Now this led to a strong rebuttal by India. For example, the retaliation in the form of trade retaliation by India. Like India temporarily restricted the imports from Malaysia. We restricted the palm oil imports from Malaysia in 2020. Also, Malaysia had refused to extradite Zakir Naik, a controversial Islamic preacher, with Mahathir Mohamad even observing that he will be unsafe in India. These stances of Malaysia, they have been out of their desire to get a leadership role in the Muslim majority countries or Muslim majority groupings, but they have been anti-India stances which have affected the ties between India and Malaysia. Additionally, there have been challenges related to diaspora as well, which we have already discussed. Now let us discuss the Act East policy as well, because deepening of the ties between India and Malaysia will be the furtherance of Act East policy. The Act East policy is a successor of the Look East policy. The earlier Look East policy, which took shape during the Narasimha Rao regime and floated during the 1990s, the Act East policy was launched in 1914 as a successor to the Look East policy, and it is more dynamic and structured. The Look East policy was also to get the cooperation of the ASEAN nations for India's economic growth as well. But the Look East policy is more dynamic, it is going beyond the symbolic overtures only. For example, going for the multidimensional engagement with the ASEAN countries and the East Asian partners. For example, the cooperation in the strategic, economic, cultural, and connectivity spheres. Additionally, in the times when there is a recalibration of the global supply chains, there is a weakening of the multilateral frameworks, we need cooperation with the East Asian partners as well, because there is a resurgence of the minilateralism. We will be needing cooperation from the smaller countries, from the ASEAN countries also. Simultaneously, there have been rising fissures within ASEAN as well. For example, we have seen the crisis in Myanmar, internal fissures in ASEAN. There is a rise in the non-traditional security issues. For example, climate change, digital insecurity, the concerns related to economic decoupling. And there are four pillars on which the Act East policy was based originally. That is culture, commerce, connectivity, and capacity building. Now in the present times, there is a need for a fifth pillar also, that is collaboration. The 5C should be the pillars of the Act East policy. Now let us look at the achievements of the Act East policy. The Act East policy has made strategic gains for India. For example, there have been the upgradation of bilateral partnerships to comprehensive strategic partnerships. The strategic partnerships, for example, with Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, and there has been an increased participation of India in the ASEAN platforms, the participation in East Asia Summit, ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, and there has been a collaboration on maritime security, for example. We can see the collaboration in maritime security, for example, through the naval exercises, through the wide shipping agreements, and improved collaboration on cyber governance, counter-terrorism, and disaster relief also. In the economic sphere also, we have seen achievements because of the Act East policy. Example, the trade volume with ASEAN has improved, although it remains low still, but there has been a diversification of exports. The exports of pharmaceuticals from India, textile, engineering goods from India, and there has been a collaboration in the newer sectors also, including semiconductors, digital services, fintech, green energy, and there have been the exploration of cross-border payments using India's solutions, fintech solutions, for example, utilizing UPI interface, and there has been the establishment of the ASEAN India funds, ASEAN India Green Fund, ASEAN India Science and Technology Fund. There is a progress on the connectivity front as well. For example, the progress of the India-Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway with proposals to extend the connectivity further to Laos and Cambodia also. And in the cultural and soft power sphere, there have been achievements, for example, the restoration of heritage sites in the ASEAN countries, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Mai Son in Vietnam, and the religious diplomacy, for example, establishment of Buddhist circuits, Ramayan trails, the celebration of Bali Jatra, Mekong Ganga Dhamma Yatra, etc. The cultural exchanges, for example, the Indian films exhibitions, film festivals being conducted in the ASEAN countries. There is development in the education and human resources sector as well. For example, the establishment of IIT campuses in Malaysia and Thailand, establishment of vocational training centers supported by India in the ASEAN countries, the conducting of Ayush programs there, the giving of scholarships by India, and the collaborations in the educational sector with the ASEAN countries. But there are certain challenges in the implementation of the Act East policy also. For example, there are geopolitical challenges. There is the rivalry between US and China. This rivalry creates the regional tensions in the Southeast Asia. The regional tensions lead to the weaponization of the global supply chains. the weaponization of the economic interdependence. It leads to lesser cohesion among the ASEAN countries. Lesser cohesion within ASEAN makes it difficult for India how to engage with the ASEAN countries. The Indian strategy becomes more complicated, and it further leads to geopolitical instability as well. We have seen that, for example, in the case of Myanmar. And there are economic challenges also. For example, there is the trade deficit with the ASEAN countries. We export less, we import more. And with the withdrawal of India from the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the ASEAN countries have a leeway with the China. They have an economic partnership with China, but India's economic leverage has been reduced in the regional economic frameworks. Although India has signed separate trade agreements with the ASEAN countries, but still the say in the regional economic framework, the RCEP, is lesser. Another challenge is that of tariff and non-tariff barriers. For example, there is a lack of harmonization of standards, which leads to reduced trade between India and ASEAN. Additionally, there is underutilization of economic complementarities. For example, India can support the East Asian neighbors by exporting IT, digital services, software, etc. And connectivity is impeded because of the geopolitical complexities. For example, we have seen the crisis in Myanmar again. Additionally, there are institutional and implementation related challenges also. Like the implementation deficit, it is observed because of the bureaucratic delays. There is a need, therefore, for a dedicated institutional mechanism which has both the access to the resources and also the authority to get the projects implemented. And there is an asymmetrical engagement as well. Like most of the ASEAN countries, they are very small as compared to the size of India. Therefore, there is slow reciprocity. There is lack of institutional pace there. There is institutional reluctance there in the implementation. And there are unresolved bilateral issues also. For example, with Bangladesh, for example, with Myanmar, etc. Now, what are the suggestions that we can give with respect to the implementation and furtherance of Act East policy? First, the political will has to be strong. For that, the coordination has to be institutionalized. The coordination between central government and the state governments, for example, between central government and the state governments of the Northeast region, between the private sector and the government, between the academia and the industry, and between the people to people ties as well. We can set up a dedicated interministerial coordination unit under the Ministry of External Affairs, which can have the power to monitor the project deadlines as well. We can have strategic country specific roadmaps for each ASEAN country, which is as per the socio-economic, political and the strategic significance of that country. And we can have the relations based upon reciprocity and mutual benefit rather than going for only symbolic engagements in the Southeast Asian region. We also need to put in place trade and investment related frameworks. For example, the trade facilitation infrastructure can be improved by investing in ports, logistics, port efficiency, and the investments can be from both India as well as the ASEAN countries. There can be the joint ventures which can be established, especially in the fields like clean energy, digital services, and the semiconductors, etc. India can also go for the branding and marketing of Indian products which can be exported there, the Indian niche products, for example, organic agricultural produce. The people to people connectivity and ties can be improved, for example, by India ASEAN Youth Fellowships, media exchange programs, social media campaigns, documentaries, podcasts in regional languages to promote their outreach. The India ASEAN centers of excellence can be built in the areas of innovation, artificial intelligence. The tourism infrastructure can be built further, investing in the Buddhist circuits, the Ramayan trails, etc. The visa policies can be liberalized further by giving them electronic visas, by giving them multiple entry schemes. There can be collaboration on the global as well as regional challenges between India and the ASEAN countries, like the collaboration on climate change, health security, food and energy resilience, cyber security related challenges. For that, there can be regional frameworks also, the regional carbon trading frameworks, as well as the cooperation for the climate change. And there can be the establishment of joint task forces, tabletop exercises, co-development of technologies, artificial intelligence technologies. And we can support the ASEAN centrality. When we are dealing with the Southeast Asia, we can promote ASEAN centrality as well as a rule-based order. The ASEAN-led mechanisms can be supported. For example, the ASEAN Vision on Indo-Pacific, the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 can be supported. Also, we need to avoid the zero-sum strategies, especially in the regional frameworks. There is a means practice question also. Malaysia occupies a pivotal position in India's Act East policy and strategy in the Indo-Pacific. Analyze the strategic, economic and geopolitical importance of India-Malaysia relations. Please try to write it. The next article is related to India-US trade deal and its impact on the critical sectors in India. This is important as the two countries have worked out the framework for an interim agreement on trade. Therefore, we will discuss the impact of India-US trade deal on the agriculture sector in India, on the artificial intelligence and data centers in India, on the import of energy into India, for example, the restrictions placed upon the import of Russian oil into India, and we'll also analyze the shift in India's approach in the negotiating of trade deals in future. This is important in GS2 under the topic bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and or affecting India's interests. First, let us discuss the impact of India-US trade deal on agriculture in India. The positives first. The trade deal will lead to greater access for India to cheaper high quality animal feed. For example, we'll be able to import cheaper distillers dried grains with solubles from US, that is DDGS. They will be exporting the DDGS made from corn, made from soybean into India. This is a cheaper protein rich livestock feed ingredient. In India, when the soybean is processed, we extract oil from it. What is left is known as the de-oiled cake, the soybean de-oiled cake. The DDGS, the distillers dried grains with solubles, this is almost an equivalent of soybean de-oiled cake in India. But the soybean de-oiled cake in India is costlier. When we measure it with respect to the protein availability in that, it is costlier. It is available around 43-44 rupees per kg and it is having about 46% protein content. But the DDGS that will be able to import from US, the rice DDGS for example, it will be imported and having a cost of just about 30 rupees per kg with a protein content which is similar around 42%. Therefore, the feedstock that will be available at a cheaper rate. Also, it will be of superior quality. For example, the US corn DDGS that has aflatoxin levels of less than 20 parts per billion. This is within the safe levels. Whereas the Indian de-oiled cake, for example, that has the levels of 100 to 200. They are considered as beyond the safe levels. Therefore, this DDGS imported from US, this will be safe for both the broilers as well as the dairy cattle also. Additionally, it will give a boost to the livestock, poultry, dairy and aquaculture industries. Why? Because they will be able to get access to cheaper feedstock. The cost reduction will be there for the feed manufacturers and therefore it will be helping the dependent industries as well. The cheap feed grade sorghum will be available, the red jawar, and this will also help the feedstock and the livestock. But there will also be a threat for some specified farm produce. This threat although will be limited. For example, there will be zero duty or reduced duty imports for tree nuts. The tree nuts are almonds, walnuts, pistachios, etc. Fruits, both fresh and processed fruits, wine, spirits, etc. from USA. But this will have a limited impact. At the same time, we have also gotten strategic concessions from USA. For example, we have shielded our sensitive sectors in agriculture from duty-free imports from USA, shielded our sectors, for example, soybean. Soybean is important for us because there are about 13 million hectares on which soybean is grown in India. We have protected those farmers and we have protected corn, maize, fuel, ethanol, cotton, dairy, poultry, etc. We have not opened them as zero duty imports from USA. But there are certain concerns as well because of the US trade deal in the agriculture sector. First, the soybean industry itself. There will be the import of cheaper DDGS made from soybean, simultaneously lower duty soybean oil also. Therefore, the soybean industry will be adversely impacted because of the cheaper DDGS made from the other resources like corn, rice, etc. This may be used rather than the de-oiled cake in soybean, which is available in India, produced in India, and the soybean oil that will also have a lower duty, which will affect the soybean farmers. Additionally, there can be a shift in the soybean oil imports. The traditional imports are coming from Brazil, Argentina, the Latin American region. Now there can be a shift towards USA because of the lower duty on the soybean imports from USA. Additionally, the ethanol distilleries, they will also be adversely affected because their byproduct, they are also selling it, and their byproduct will be directly competing with the DDGS that we will import from USA. The grain based distilleries, they will also be selling the DDGS, the byproduct, after processing for ethanol. It will be competing with the US imports of DDGS. There can be potential hidden concessions also because it includes unspecified additional products. What if this unspecified additional products are including future products, for example dairy, soybean, etc., and India has also agreed to address long standing non tariff barriers demand, that is removal of non tariff barriers to the US farm goods. What if this is utilized for getting concessions for the import of GM foods into India? That will adversely impact not only agriculture but the health ecosystem as well. What if it is utilized for getting concessions for the dairy products imports into India, which we have tried to shield as of now? Additionally, there will be trade deficit risk in specific categories. For example, India is already the biggest market for the tree nuts from USA. India is accounting for 15% of US's total exports of the tree nuts from USA. And there can be long-term market access pressure also. The trade deal, the interim framework has been arrived upon. The interim nature of the deal can be utilized in future to maintain a consistent pressure on India to further open up the other sectors, for example dairy, poultry, etc. Now let us observe the impact of the US trade deal with respect to the energy imports into India. The US executive order that has observed that India has given certain commitments. The commitments are, as per the US executive order, that India will stop directly or indirectly importing the Russian Federation oil, that they will not be importing it, and India will be purchasing US energy products, and there will be a framework. India has committed to a framework as per the US executive order to expand defense cooperation in the next 10 years. What has been India's stance? Earlier, India was taking an even more stern stance that US is unfairly targeting India. The US targeting of India is unjustified and unreasonable when India was importing Russian oil. Now also our position has been a steadfast position. The Ministry of External Affairs has taken a steadfast position that our priority is to ensure energy security for 140 crore Indians, and therefore now we are just diversifying the energy sourcing based upon objective market conditions and international dynamics. But if we observe the current data trends, our import of Russian oil has been falling. The US share of oil imports from April to October has increased to more than 12%. The earlier year it was less than 5%. Our import of oil from US has been rising. Similarly, Russia's share of oil imports, oil exports into India has been declining. It was at a peak in June 2025. Post that, it has declined. In June 2025, it was close to 2 million barrels per day of imports from Russia into India. Now it has fallen to closer to 1 million barrels of oil per day. It has reached a 3-year low as of January 2026. Its share has declined from 37% to just about 32%. With USA, we already have an existing 1-year deal. The Indian refiners, they have public sector refiners, they already have a 1-year deal of importing LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, from USA, and the imports of LPG from USA, they are almost to the tune of 10% of our needs. But there are certain challenges in implementing the complete stop on the Russian imports. The Russian oil imports into India, they can't be halted completely because it will not be feasible. There are feasibility concerns related to technical as well as strategic autonomy related concerns. If India completely cedes to the US demand of bringing down the Russian oil imports into India to zero, that might be affecting India's strategic autonomy as well as energy security. Additionally, there are technical concerns also. For example, there are pre-booked cargoes. The Indian refiners, they have already booked the Russian oil cargoes imports into India for the month of March and even till early April also. And there is the case of Naira Energy, for example. The Naira Energy, the refiner has the capacity to process 4 lakh barrels per day, and it is almost entirely dependent upon the Russian oil imported into India. There is a significant stake of Rosneft into India, and if the Russian oil import is completely stopped into India, it may amount to completely shutting down Naira Energy. Otherwise, we will have to create stable supply chains for it. Therefore, there are concerns that it can't be completely stopped. There may be gradual phase-wise reduction of oil imports from Russia into India. There are also challenges in ramping up the imports from USA into India. US is asking India to purchase oil from it. But there are challenges. For example, there will be higher freight cost. The freight cost, the cost of transporting crude oil from USA, it will be double that of the freight cost that we incur on importing from West Asia. Therefore, it won't be economically feasible. Also, there are technical challenges. For example, the crude grade that we get from USA, that is lighter and sweeter, whereas the Indian refiners, they are also technically suited towards the medium sour grades that we get from the West Asia as well as Russia. Although the LNG imports from US may be a practical and a feasible option, the liquefied natural gas supplier, US is already the second largest LNG supplier into India, the largest being Qatar. US is the second largest. It is giving us LNG at a discounted price. Therefore, even though the freight cost of importing from US into India may be higher, but because of the discounted price at which US sells LNG, it is taken into account and it is economically feasible. And also the LNG quality as well is broadly consistent across various geographies, unlike the crude oil whose quality varies as per the geographies. Therefore, we can rather import more LNG from USA. Now let us observe the impact of the US trade deal regarding the establishment of the data centers in India, which India wants to promote. Let us first observe the initiatives that India has taken up for the promotion of data centers in India. There is no local GPU production capacity into India. Therefore, India took initiatives, for example, providing tax holidays for the foreign companies for them to establish in India. Taxes will not be imposed if they are establishing the data centers in India. The budget also gave the allocation for India AI mission, India Artificial Intelligence mission, although the budget allocation has been cut down to half. Last fiscal year, 2000 crores were allocated for the artificial intelligence mission. This year only 1000 crore has been allocated to it. At the same time, the compute costs, the GPU costs that have been subsidized for the startups, for the entrepreneurs, so that the developers, they can also continue researching in the computing domain. But there has been a change in the US policy and it has led to a gain for India. The earlier Biden administration that had imposed restrictions upon the exports of the GPU. In the name of preserving their national security, they had imposed restrictions on the exports of GPUs. But during the Trump era, now the restrictions have been eased slightly and India has extracted favorable terms in the trade deal, in the interim agreement. For example, no US export control measure has been imposed regarding the export of GPUs into India. And there are export control measures when the GPUs are exported to China. Most of the cutting edge technologies related to GPUs, they are restricted from being directly exported to China. India has escaped any such export controls. Therefore, there have been a series of announcements of investment in data centers in India. For example, Google has committed to invest $1.5 billion in India for establishing a 1 gigawatt data center in partnership with the Adani Group. Microsoft has also pledged to invest $17 billion in India, Amazon $15 billion in India. and the data centers that is expected to generate about $1.2 billion of revenue in fiscal year 2024 as per a report of NROG. Therefore, the Indian government has also been giving tax breaks to the foreign countries and giving the affordable access to land, energy and water for the companies investing in the data centers in India. Now let us also look at the India-US trade deal and the shift that we can observe in the Indian approach towards negotiating of trade deals. The India-US trade deal can be seen like an inflection point in India's approach towards negotiations. Earlier, we used to have a defensive instincts. Now we have broken from that. We have shown a more assertive stance and we have moved beyond looking at the trade deals with USA through the lens of sovereignty or strategic autonomy. That is what we used to do. All the earlier US engagements with India that were seen through the lens of strategic autonomy and sovereignty only. Even the public discourse, the domestic debate, the nature of it was that they were looking at the evolution of relationship with USA, not at the merits of India-US trade deal. And even the accord with USA that is historically seen with more scrutiny. If a similar deal is signed with Russia, say, or for example with a willing Beijing, then the scrutiny level is not as much as which is accorded to India-US trade deals. Now when we look at the economic context, we had to sign a trade deal with USA because there is no serious alternative. Our exports to USA, they are to the tune of $80 billion. Our exports to Russia, $5 billion. Our exports to China, $15 billion. So there are no serious alternatives to having a trade deal with USA and European Union. Also, a balanced trade deal with USA now, it is signaling a pragmatism in the US approach also. It is a good deal for India with pragmatism and it is in contrast with the past negotiations. For example, when we look at the nuclear deal precedent, at that time, the aim of the nuclear deal was to ensure that India is not isolated in the atomic sphere. But that time also there were concerns that what if India becomes a vessel of USA, that the engagement with USA that was conflated with the surrender of the strategic autonomy. But what happened after that? India imported nuclear reactors more from Russia rather than USA. When we look at the pragmatism also, the morality at times gives way to pragmatism, practicality. And there was commercial pragmatism, commercial practicality when we were buying Russian oil. It was cheaper for us and we were looking at the economic interests and the foreign policy decisions also. They should also be seen through the lens of economic interest, not only treated as litmus tests of autonomy. And trade should be seen as a positive sum game rather than having a zero sum game mindset, which is usually there in the public discourse. When only the negatives, only the concessions are seen, the gains are usually ignored. So we can see this as a positive sum game. Now there is a mains practice question also. Examine the impact of the India-US trade agreement with specific reference to agriculture and energy sectors. How does this evolving trade engagement indicate a shift in India's approach to trade negotiations? Please try to write it. The next article is related to persons of Indian origin. This is important in GS2 under the topic Indian diaspora. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few aspects of the diaspora, why it is significant. The diaspora projects India's soft power, it projects India's cultural diplomacy. For example, it promotes Indianness. From red carpet to cuisines, it promotes India's taste, India's cuisines, and they also invest in their host countries. Therefore, they lead to the economic growth of their host countries and gain significant economic clout there. They promote vocal for local, for example, promoting Indian tea, Indian textiles in the other countries. They are also a source of remittance for India. The remittances from the Indian diaspora into India contribute to about 3% of India's GDP. And they are also significant for diaspora diplomacy. For example, the diaspora in important positions like Sundar Pichai, Kamala Harris, etc. And they are also contributing to research and innovation in India, for example, through the Vaibhav Summit. But the Indian diaspora faces certain challenges. Like they are having a heterogeneous nature. They have differential needs. The diaspora in the Gulf region needs welfare so that they are not exploited by their employers in the Gulf region. Whereas the diaspora in the advanced economies in the developed countries, they need investment opportunities. They have already earned there, they want to invest the money into India through remittances. They also face the challenge of regulatory cholesterol, the services provided by the Indian missions, the bureaucratic red tape, the delays, etc. And sometimes they become a victim of protectionism. The protectionism in the host countries where they are residing, like the Nitakat law in Saudi Arabia, through which the companies in Saudi Arabia, they are mandated to employ the Saudi nationals rather than giving employment to the foreigners, including the Indian diaspora. And sometimes they get stuck in the sectarian conflicts, for example the Shia Sunni conflict in the Middle East region, and they are victims of discrimination, isolation, as well as exploitation also, like through the kafala system, where they are tied to a single employer only, they can't work for any other employer there, and they get recruited in the conflict zones also, for example the Israel Hamas conflict, etc. There also there is Indian diaspora. So what are the steps that the government has taken for the welfare of Indian diaspora? First, there is the OCI scheme, Overseas Citizenship of India scheme, launched in 2005, through which they can get a lifelong visa with multiple entries. There won't be any restrictions on the duration of stay also. There is the celebration of Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. There is also the mandatory insurance which is provided through the Pravasi Bharatiya Bima Yojana. Through this Pravasi Bharatiya Bima Yojana, mandatory insurance is provided to those persons who are emigrating under the ECR category, emigration check required. For example, who are illiterate. They need a mandatory insurance so that they are not exploited through the Pravasi Bharatiya Bima Yojana. There is the Madad portal through which they can lodge the grievances online as well, get services from the Indian missions abroad. There are the Pravasi Bharatiya Sahayata Kendras established. There is No India program through which the young Indian diaspora from the age of 18 to 30 years, for them, their roots are taught to them so that they can learn about their Indian roots. And there is the establishment of Indian Community Welfare Fund as well for financial assistance. Now coming to the article, there was a hyped clout, a misplaced assumption that the persons of Indian origin will play a significant role in the signing of India-US trade deal. But that did not happen. The PIOs in America, they were once seen as model immigrants. They were having low crime rates, high incomes. The average household income of the PIOs, that was higher even than the US average. They were donating to the campaign of Trump. They were heading corporate giants, for example Sundar Pichai. You can write the names of a few Indian diaspora when you are writing an answer on Indian diaspora. For example, Kamala Harris, the candidate of the Democrats for president in 2024, the newly elected mayor of New York, Zohran Mamdani. Similarly, the wife of Vice President J.D. Vance, Usha, whose parents migrated from Andhra Pradesh. But some PIOs, they proved to be Trojan horses. The PIO cohort of Trump that seems to believe in the Hindi proverb that the newest convert is keenest to prove his loyalty. For example, Vance, a product of the MAGA movement in USA, is vulnerable because of his Hindu spouse, and he even admitted that he hoped to persuade her to convert. Similarly, Dillon in Justice Department is known for her tough line in prosecuting student demonstrators. Kash Patel, the FBI chief, has enforced Trump's agenda vigorously with special attention to their pet projects. When Modi visited USA for a Quad summit in 2024, the Democrat candidate Harris's office could not even find an available time slot for meeting the Indian Prime Minister. So some of the PIOs there, they have rather proved to be Trojan horses rather than aiding India. The next article is related to Durgavati Tiger Reserve and Kuno National Park. This is important in GS3 under the topic Environment Conservation. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few facts regarding the Durgavati Tiger Reserve and Kuno National Park. The Durgavati Tiger Reserve is located in the Sagar, Damoh and Narsinghpur districts of Madhya Pradesh, and it includes the areas in Noradehi Wildlife Sanctuary and Durgavati Wildlife Sanctuary. This is the 7th tiger reserve in the state of Madhya Pradesh. The name is derived from Rani Durgavati, who was the queen of the Gondi people there, and Through the tiger reserve, the Narmada river basin and the Yamuna river basin also passes. It also is home to the Singorgarh fort. The vegetation in the tiger reserve is dry deciduous type. The flora here is teak, saja, dhaura, ber and amla trees. The fauna in the Durgavati Tiger Reserve includes tiger, leopard, wolf, jackal, Indian fox, striped hyena, nilgai, chinkara, cheetal, sambar, black buck, barking deer, rhesus macaque. And it is also having a significant population of the critically endangered raptors in India, white rumped and the Indian vultures. There is a proposal to develop a green corridor linking the Panna Tiger Reserve with the Durgavati Tiger Reserve as well. Coming to the Kuno National Park, it is also situated in the state of Madhya Pradesh near the Vindhyan Hills, and through this passes the Kuno River, which is a tributary of Chambal, and it was also part of the action plan for the introduction of cheetah in India, and it is home to tropical dry deciduous forests. The flora here comprises of more than 129 species of trees, significant ones being Kardhai, Khair and Salai. The fauna in the Kuno National Park includes cheetah, jungle cat, Indian leopard, sloth bear, Indian wolf, striped hyena, golden jackal, Bengal fox, dhole, and there are also more than 120 bird species which are found in the Kuno National Park. Now coming to the article, the Standing Committee for the National Board of Wildlife has recommended the approval of diversion of more than 270 hectares of forest for the Copra medium irrigation project in the core area of the Durgavati Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh. It was notified in 2023 to compensate for the loss of over 100 square kilometer of tiger habitat due to the Ken-Betwa river linking project. The irrigation reservoirs will be constructed within the Durgavati Tiger Reserve along the Bayarma River and the Copra River. These are important for prelims. And regarding the Kuno National Park, there a cheetah, Asha, brought from Namibia under the Cheetah Reintroduction Program has delivered 5 cubs at the Kuno National Park, and it has taken the total population of cheetahs in India to 35 now. The next article is related to the push for Ayush which was given in the budget. This is important in GS2 under the topic health. Ayush has got a significant push in the union budget this year, which has allotted more than 4,400 crore rupees for Ayush. 3 new All India Institutes of Ayurveda will be set up. These will be analogous to All India Institute of Medical Sciences for the Scientific Medicine, and they will be having 3 functions. The All India Institutes of Ayurveda, they will be treating patients, they will be teaching Ayurveda, and they will also be conducting high level research in Ayurveda. There is also the proposal to upgrade the WHO Global Traditional Medicine Center in Jamnagar, and it will be setting the global standards for practice and documentation of the traditional medicine. The budget has also increased the allocation for the National Ayush Mission by 66%, and it will be seeking to modernize the local Ayush hospitals. The Ayush clinics will be set up inside the existing modern hospitals through the principle of co-location, and the existing centers will be upgraded to focus on the preventive healthcare as well. There is the launch of the multilingual AI assistant named as Bharat Vistar. This AI assistant will be giving the farmers the tips regarding the growing of medicinal plants, giving them real-time advice, and it will also be giving advice regarding the better quality herbs, current market prices and the certification of the crops for the export purposes also. Now, the free trade agreement between India and European Union will also be significant for Ayush, as the Indian Ayurvedic doctors working in Europe, they were facing difficulties regarding the recognition of their degrees. Now they will be able to practice in Europe, and the Indian degrees in Ayush, they will also be treated as valid under the India-Europe Free Trade Agreement, and the Indian companies, they will also get a legal guarantee to open the wellness centers and Ayurvedic clinics in the European countries also, so that in future no European laws will be made to completely shut them down. And there is also the agreement for the mutual recognition of the safety certifications. That is, if an Ayurvedic medicine has been produced and tested in India, then the safety efficacy trials that will be recognized in the European Union also. The free trade agreement with India and European Union formally recognizes the India's TKDL, Traditional Knowledge Digital Library, which is a hub for the traditional medicines knowledge, and it also prevents the companies from wrongly patenting, wrongly claiming ownership regarding the Indian traditional medicines as well. Now, what are the Ayush resources in India? There are a network of hospitals and the research councils for this, and the government provides the support to integrate the traditional medicine into healthcare. For this, the co-location will be the primary policy. That is the establishment of the Ayush centers in the modern hospitals which provide allopathic medicines, and there is the All India Institute of Ayurveda in New Delhi, the National Institute of Homeopathy in Kolkata. Through the Ayur Gyan scheme, focus will be upon the education related to Ayush and capacity building, and through the Ayur Swasthya Yojana, traditional medicine will be utilized to meet the community health goals. Now, is the Ayush medicine scientific? There are concerns raised by the Indian Medical Association, like the Ayush medicines, they lack the rigorous and empirical evidence. The safety and efficacy trials are not conducted in line with the allopathic drugs. They are rather prepared based on the ancient texts and the observational history. On the other hand, the allopathic drugs, they are having randomized controlled trials before they are released for use by the public for their safety and efficacy. There are also allegations that there is the presence of heavy metals, for example lead and mercury, in the Ayush products. Therefore, there have been health advisories issued in several countries like Australia, USA and New Zealand regarding the concerns of the presence of lead in the Ayush products. There are the allegations that there is mixopathy being promoted in India as alleged by IMA, that the state itself promotes the integration of the traditional medicine into the healthcare, and the IMA even alleges that there is a legalization of quackery. For example, the state promoting the conducting of the surgeries by the Ayush doctors, the state promoting the prescription of the allopathic medicines by the Ayush doctors, and the Ayush doctors, if they start prescribing the allopathic medicines, it may lead to an irrational drug use and increase in the antibiotic resistance as well. The next article is related to the mental health crisis in India. This is important in GS2 under the topic health. India's mental health burden is significant. India accounts for one-third of the world's suicides, depression and addiction cases. And suicide has proven to be the leading cause of death among Indians, young Indians especially aged from 15 to 29 years. And it has caused an economic loss also. For example, a WHO report notes that the economic loss due to the mental health burden from 2012 to 2030 will be around $1 trillion. And about 70 to 90% of Indians who are suffering from mental health issues do not receive proper treatment. The reasons for the lack of treatment are the lack of awareness, the stigma related to the mental health and the shortage of the mental health care professionals also. In India, there are just 0.75 psychiatrists per 1 lakh people, whereas WHO recommends that there should be 3 psychiatrists per 1 lakh people. And the specific allocations for the mental health in the budget, they are very less. That accounts for just about 1% of the total health budget, and the proportion allocated to the healthcare sector itself is very low. So does India have enough hospitals? The government has integrated the mental health care services into the health and wellness centers established through the Ayushman Bharat. There are more than 1.73 lakh sub-health centers and the primary health care centers upgraded to the Ayushman Arogya Mandirs. There is the Telemanas initiative also, which is a 24/7 free tele-mental health initiative. The helpline is available 24/7. So where is the shortfall? The mental health allocation is less than 2% of the total health budget, and the total health budget itself is around just 2% of the national GDP. And a significant share of this budget also is going towards the tertiary institutions, for example NIMHANS, and these funds are also not completely utilized. And there is a need for community based early intervention model so that the mental health issues can be detected early and there is no stigma which is attached to it. So what is the way ahead? First, we need to ensure affordable access, continuity of care, so that the mental health issues can be resolved completely, and timely treatment. For this, we need to focus on the preventive care, not curative. Rather, the focus currently has been upon the tertiary care institutions, which is curative in nature. We can adopt a whole of community approach, which the health ministry also suggests, integrating the mental well-being into the school curriculum as well. And we can strengthen the workplace policies also, so that exploitation, mental stress, that can be dealt with. The next article is related to the rediscovering of bamboo. This is important in GS3 under the topic major crops and cropping patterns in various parts of the country. Before coming to the article, let's discuss regarding the restructured National Bamboo Mission. The National Bamboo Mission was launched as a centrally sponsored scheme in 2018-19, and it provides assistance to both government as well as the private sector for the cultivation of bamboo in the non-forest land, bamboo treatment, establishment of markets, incubation centers, and the value-added product development also. The funding provided by the central government is in the ratio of 60-40, 60% by the center, 40% by the states, and in the northeast and hilly states it is the 90% funding by center, 10% by the states, and for the union territories and bamboo technology support groups, 100% funding is provided by the central government. The objectives of the restructured National Bamboo Mission are to ensure the availability of quality planting materials, to expand the area which is under the cultivation of bamboo, to ensure post-harvest management, primary treatment, seasoning, preservation technologies, market infrastructure, product development, skill development, and to reduce the dependency on import. The implementation of the restructured National Bamboo Mission is done through the state nodal departments, which the states nominate themselves. Now coming to the article, the bamboo is called as baas in Hindi and mungil in Tamil. It is an ancient plant which grows fast on wet soil in broad sunlight. The Jain monks in India, the forest exiles, they used to have bamboo stems and leaves for food since the ancient times. The bamboo crop is grown in tropical and humid conditions with good sunlight exposure and soil which is rich in organic matter. It is grown significantly in the states of Assam, Tripura, Mizoram, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. The bamboo-based industries using indigenous knowledge, they can be strengthened scientifically by policy interventions by setting up the bamboo research centers to enhance the local knowledge, and there can be newer uses which can be explored in an era where we need sustainability. And therefore, Prime Minister Modi inaugurated a biorefinery which will be producing 50,000 million tons of ethanol from bamboo in Assam in Noballigad, and it can also be used in clothing, baskets, mats, chairs, tables, shelves, roofing and flooring, musical instruments, for example flutes, drums, and incense sticks also. Bamboo also has a significant export potential, for example exporting its materials through the full length glass mirrors, cotton textiles, bamboo jewelry to USA, Denmark and Nigeria, and India ranks among the top 3 exporters of bamboo and its products with an income of several $million. There are also nutritional benefits of bamboo, including bamboo shoots, leaves and seeds in diets, and this has been observed through several research studies also. It also contains essential amino acids, vitamin A, B6, E, and also regulates blood sugar and lipid levels. So these are good against diabetes and heart disease. Thank you.